superheroes are all the rage these days, although I guess some would say we're in the waning days of the superhero craze. I don't know that I would say that. I would say we're in the stage of sort of crappy superhero movies. But Marvel and DC have cornered the market on superheroes since the existence of superheroes, pretty much. And of course, there are other superheroes, though, that are not from Marvel and DC, some of whom fairly popular and have decent stories behind them. So, my question to you guys today is, are you interested in superheroes outside the big two, or are big two superheroes the only ones that you can bring yourself to care about, and everything outside of that is just too much superheroing for you?
For me, it's tricky um, because superheroes is what Marvel and DC is. So if I want to read those continued stories, I'm getting superheroes. Sure, I can get different flavors of it. I can get a noir book, I can get a comedy book here and there, but it's going to be superhero. It's going to be a superhero book no matter what. Um, Whereas stuff like I'm thinking like Invincible, it's a superhero book as well, but it's not one of the big two. I think that was it is very popular currently. Omni Man's huge. He was in Mortal Kombat. Invincible, the cartoon show, is really big. It's doing great stuff. Um, but for me, when it comes to outside of the big two, it depends on the creative team. Like I would pick up Invincible because I saw it was Kirkman. You know, I don't think I would have been too in the know of who Otley was at the time, but nowadays, if I see Otley on a book, I'm going to pick that book up as well. So I think it really depends on the creative team. I mean, I think Local Man by Tony Fleeks and Tim Seeley, it's currently out from Image, is a superhero book, but it's told in a different way and it's kind of playing on certain themes. But I didn't read it because I wasn't really familiar with the creative team. The buzz around the book has made me want to read it,
Mm.
but it wasn't because it was a superhero book.
What was the Donny Cates book, Tyler?
Crossover?
Sorry?
Was it crossover?
Crossover, right?
Yeah.
Like I think when it comes to superhero books outside of the big two, I'm expecting more out of them. Only because I know that if I want my meat and potatoes saves the day type thing, I'm gonna go to DC because of familiarity. There's a connection there already, but there's a different expectation for superheroes outside of the big two, and I'm thinking of crossover in particular because that has those elements specifically, and it pulls from that history, but it's self-aware of the fact that it can't be those things. And I think that mm, if I do go for a superhero book that sits outside of the big two, it's harder to invest into. Invincible probably is the best example. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't know if I count them. Um,
Daredevil counts.
yeah, they're different flavors and so much more variation that it's hard to invest because I have a set idea of what a superhero book is, and unfortunately, it is a Marvel or DC book.
The crossover example is a good one because I don't necessarily want to read a book about. I don't want to read an Image Comics, Inception Youngblood comic. That's just not what I'm interested in. But if those characters in crossover are in the real world and there's a dissection of what a superhero is, by a writer that I'm familiar with, that is more interesting to me, even though
Right.
it has the same characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the two things I really look for are concept and costume. If the costume is bad, boy, I switch off. But the big selling point to me is really the concept. I think specifically of Black Hammer, which is,
Mm.
basically Jeff Lemire takes on the DC universe with slight twists. But it started as five superheroes get trapped on a farm that they can't leave. That's crazy. Okay.
But it's still different. It's not I'm gonna go save the day, a damsel in distress. Like there's the difference there is the concept of they're stuck on a farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's why something like Radiant Black hasn't really resonated with us. Because
Mm.
Radiant Black, while I can see how it is a good comic, and I see that there's a lot of buzz around it and people like it, it is very straightforward. It's a superhero world. There's a superhero here, and he does superhero things. Okay, I
And
read that.
especially as it's marketed as sort of like an almost, a Power Rangers alternative. It's also just like, well, I also have the Power Rangers and it's done by the Power Rangers people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm certainly not opposed to superheroes outside of the big two. I consider Spawn a superhero and I love Spawn.
Yep.
Um, I consider the Turtles superheroes. I love them, although I don't read the book. Um, so I'm not opposed. And then like things like Irredeemable,
Yeah.
that I really liked as well. So it's not that I don't want superheroes outside of the big two, but it is that we already have the big two. So when I see a book that's a superhero book and it's not a character that I'm familiar with, it has a lot of work to do to sell me on why I need this when I could just buy Superman. And that's why one of the biggest pieces of advice to new creators right out the gate is if you didn't somehow luck into a job at Marvel or DC, you shouldn't write a superhero comic
Sure.
Yep.
because the biggest titans of the industry already do that at such a high level that whatever it is that you're going to do is not going to compare to that. And when we were reviewing Radiant Black, like I just didn't think I wasn't over the moon about what was happening in the book. But it also has a lot of competition
Yeah.
because if I want to read a super team book, I can read X-Men. If I
Yep.
want to read a Power Rangers book, I can literally read Power Rangers. If I want a superhero book, take your pick. And so it wasn't materially different enough, and the quality didn't stand out enough for me to say, I have to be pulling this, especially when it's a universe. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
A superhero universe is something that I have absolutely zero interest in outside of the big two. None, never, don't care.
What
Well,
if they brought back
Okay,
like
here we
the?
go.
What if they did something similar to what Invincible was doing towards the end there? What was it? Uh, they were bringing in Youngblood characters. They were bringing in Savage Dragon and stuff like that. If they start bringing in those like image characters into like, hey, now all these are interconnected with even some books that you didn't expect it to be connected to, would that interest you?
No, and I think that if Image themselves thought that that was really really
They would
viable,
have
they
done
would
it.
have
Yeah.
done it already. I don't think that that's compelling. I don't care about Savage Dragon. I know people do. That's cool. It's not about that. It's about the fact that those characters joining forces for some reason doesn't make sense because they weren't intended to do that.
Yeah.
They don't exist in the same universe, all of them. So then the idea that they would feels ham-fisted to me. And I don't read all those books, so I don't know if
Yeah.
everything I just said is accurate, but I do know that they don't all share a space, right?
At its inception, they were supposed to.
Hmm.
And then the writers kind of veered off into their own things and it became their own world. Savage Dragon still has crossovers in it occasionally, but that book isn't really a superhero book anymore. It's more of a
Right.
slice of life book at this point.
Right.
And even then, like once you start talking about universes and bringing other things in, it's like, well, you've got to read this to understand that and understand this and that. And then it's the same again, it's the same as Marvel and DC. You start spiraling out and it especially when you're starting so small, you lose the seed, you know?
but I'm also not looking for that in my books outside of the big two. Again, I have that in the
Yeah.
big two. I don't need the connecting universe. I'm coming to Image so that I don't have to be bogged down with history, with finality, or with the unending nature and cyclical version of comics. Like that's what I'm looking for, and why I'm not reading the big two. Then
And to a degree, we complain about the history and the cyclical nature in those companies.
yeah,
I was gonna
So
say
exactly.
why would I want it in something small?
we just did a whole thing about why comics aren't good anymore. Like I'm also a little bit tired of that, even in the books that I'm reading that are superhero books.
Like Valiant. they just announced a rebirth that they're going to do, and they're doing this huge event, and they're going to tie their characters in, and they got all this stuff that they're doing, and it's like you're trying to make this happen when it's already happening at the highest level somewhere else. And I feel like comics don't have room for another superhero universe when the big two already make up like 90% of the market share or something insane like that. Like, you're not going to carve out any piece for yourself if you're trying to do the literal exact same thing.
Do you
Yeah,
think that urge to do that is because it's so commonplace now with Marvel doing a multiverse and that's a known thing? The idea of
Yeah.
a cinematic universe exists.
Yep.
So independents will also want their own because now it's almost expected.
Well, Valiant, I think, has flirted with this idea for some time. I don't
It,
think
no,
this is a
they've
new
always
idea.
connected. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Valiant's always
So
connected.
like, cool. But if you'll notice, Valiant has not had the greatest amount of success. And I believe that a part of the reason is because when you are comparing superheroes, if you see Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Flash and Aquaman and all them, and then you look at the Valiant characters and you look at what's going on over there, it just, to me, looks like an imitation. And that's not to disrespect those creators or
Yeah.
those characters. I know people are passionate about them, but it's hard for me to look at that and say, well, aren't you doing what they're doing, but just not as good?
and to something like that where the other thing I thought of was Geiger and that whole the new stuff coming out of Ghost Machine is they're leaning into the genre aspect of it, right? Yes, you have these elements of superheroics, but the spin of it is I'm going into genre, which is something that historically has existed in comics, but it hasn't been as layered in. It's been superhero with a flavor of, not a flavor of this, with a flavor of superheroics, which I think is going to be slightly different, and why that might be why that might be more successful than some of the other attempts that we've had at Image, at a Valiant, at whatever else X company that they're trying to get their feet off the ground using a proprietary superhero.
Even,
Go ahead, Kel.
even then, personally, I'm still skeptical.
It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough, 100%.
So I'm glad you brought up Ghost Machine. That's a great angle to bring to this. I see that as different. I see it as different because when I'm personally reading the Ghost Machine things that we've read, I don't think superhero.
Hmm.
Like, they're so rooted in genre and in the exact specific idea of what's being told that they don't feel the same as superheroes. It doesn't feel like, okay, here's the framing device for this character to exist, and now get ready for them to exist in perpetuity. It feels like there's meaningful story that's going to be told. We're going to get, a narrative that will push forward, and I think these characters are going to largely be sequestered unto themselves outside of the team up phases, and then also not all of the Ghost Machine characters will ever cross. Like,
Sure.
Rook Exodus is its own thing unto itself. It's only the Geiger stuff and the unnamed verse that is actually, a universe unto itself, from
Right.
what I understand. No, Cale?
Still, just it's a universe, and it's still just like, to me, as good as Jeff and his teams are, and as good as these books, might be, like, it still turns me off. Just the idea of all of these books being part, it's another universe to follow, you know? And if they're good, that won't matter.
Yeah, I hear that. I definitely hear that. It'll. I think it's largely, as it relates to Ghost Machine, going to be in the execution.
Yeah.
Because
Mm.
Valiant is very explicit about this is a universe, of characters.
Mhm.
And I guess Image at some point was like that, and you still see the crossovers today. If you pick up Geiger and it's just, hey, here's Redcoat, here's Junkyard Joe, here's all these people, and
Right.
it's always like that, I could see that being graded for sure.
And I think so far with Ghost Machine, we've only had one book at a time.
And I think that's what I've appreciated about the
Yeah.
way they're doing it, because I'm not crazy about Geiger, but I did really like Junkyard Joe.
But
And
yeah, they didn't need to tie into each other. They were just
Right. Right.
sequential books. Now that we're getting 3 books next week, that would also, the trajectory would be they would all drop on the same week, possibly going
Rook
forward.
Exodus is, I think, isn't that the only one? Is there one
Rook,
more?
Rook, Geiger, and Redcoat are all dropping for us in this period next week.
Yeah. I
Gotcha.
don't know what it looks like going forward, but once you have at least 2 of those books are going to be in the same universe.
Yeah.
So it really is like, all right, let's see what the forward momentum looks like.
Mm.
The question I wanted to ask was, how did you feel about Geiger, or rather Junkyard Joe, appearing in Geiger and the crossover stuff that we've already got?
I don't think I got that far.
I mean, but it was a small.
Small, yeah.
It was small. It was like a, it's part of. It felt more like lore that then got expanded upon. Than
Yep.
it's a character. It exists. It was something in the background that was just like, oh, if I had paid, that's right. That
Yeah.
felt good though, because
You
that
you
learns the lesson of comics, of years of history, et cetera, universe, blah blah blah. Right. I think that makes sense.
you can read them exclusive to each other and still get the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And also for me, it's not like I'm turned off to a universe. I'm turned off to a superhero universe.
Mm.
I don't want Marvel or DC again somewhere else. If it's gonna be meaningfully different than that, and it's not gonna be, like I said, here's the framing device for this character to now exist in perpetuity and deal with the same shit over and over again. If Geiger's gonna have a life and death, if it's not gonna be a perpetuity thing, then I can get behind that. But I don't want like whatever version of the Justice League they would then have, and having
Yeah.
them have team meetings and doing all those things. And once they stop the threat they built each other to defeat, now they're like, well, what else should we do? I don't want that. I don't want that.
One title that does that, but does it in an interesting way, is Kurt Busiek's Astro City.
Hmm.
Every story, you know, varying on how big it is, but every story takes place from the point of view of a civilian of some kind. And you're always looking up at the action and sort of getting the facts, and they're telling the story that way. And Kurt is such a good writer that each one is so different that it all has a different flavor. And it's all insanely good.
And they're all not chronological too. So like a character that
Yeah.
might have died in one story might show up again in another story because it takes place beforehand. Yeah, I think that just plays with the tropes in such a certain way
Yeah.
that it is a dissection of the superhero genre rather than it being that, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
Tyler brought up Invincible earlier, and I think it was Tyler. And that is an example of a superhero that is extremely popular right now that has nothing to do with Marvel or DC. Obviously, Invincible exists, and Kirkman loved superheroes and put a
Yeah.
lot of his love for that in that story. But I don't think Invincible is loved by people so much because it's different. I think it's loved by people because it is a superhero story that isn't Superman, that can do things that Superman cannot do, and can be things that Superman can't be. People love the blood and the gore and the hyper violence of it. They enjoy all of that. It's like this character is Spider-Man and Superman, and at the same time, and he beats the shit out of people and gets the shit beat out of him, and there's a bloody mess. So I guess in that sense, what that tells me is that audiences aren't burned out on superheroes, and that you can deliver a superhero that doesn't come from Marvel or DC that people can fall in love with, but it's gotta be different. Because one thing I can tell you is you will never see whether it's a movie or I don't even imagine an animation with Superman in that type of position where there's all that type of blood and death and violence. I don't think you can get that from Superman, but you can get that from Invincible.
Mhm.
And that's the
Mhm.
difference. What's your stance? How do you feel about superheroes outside of the big two? Do you enjoy them? Are there any that you like? Are you an Invincible fan? Maybe you like Spawn. Maybe you like Savage Dragon. If you're a Radiant Black fan, please go easy on us. We've been down this road before and we don't want to do it again. Thank you so much for watching, guys. We will see you in the next one. Till then, take care.